Welcome back, everybody. I'm so excited to bring another amazing guest to our Desk Careers Digital Spotlight at Dubai English Speaking College. Today, we travel back to the UAE and we meet Rodger Macfarlane, who is the Technical Director of Culligan Middle East. It's very exciting to bring Rodger to us today because the topic we're going to be talking about, all to deal with his career, of course, but looking at water as the product that his organization provides. Definitely something that young people are very interested in learning more about, especially those students thinking about environmental careers and thinking about a challenge that might exist in the world. And water is definitely one of those challenges and always talked about during the times that we're living in today. And definitely it was a really big topic before the pandemic sort of took the headlines. So let's welcome Rodger to our platform. Thank you for joining us today, Rodger.
Welcome. Good morning.
It's really exciting to have you here with us. So just to put it into context, it is July and we are still working remotely. COVID-19 still has taken the world by a storm and is challenging us in so many ways, and that is definitely something I want to be talking about and how it's changed how business works. But before we get into Culligan Middle East, let's talk about the man behind the title. Who is Rodger Macfarlane, and how did you come to become the technical director at Culligan Middle East?
Okay, I started out my journey in this direction probably not long after I graduated, which is a very long time ago, 1982. So when I graduated as a chemical engineer, my first job was with a specialty chemical company based in a town called Reading, about 30-40 miles west of London in the UK. And that was a technical services job which covered all sorts of different things. You couldn't buy the experience that I got from that job. 1 minute I was working in the lab, 1 minute I was working out on production, the next minute I was taking a pool car and meeting someone out on site to solve some problem or another. It was absolutely fabulous experience. Just towards the end of that job, I was asked to go and run some training at their head office in London about water treatment. And I was handed a manual and told, right, you've got to read that and then run the training course in 2 days' time, which I did. And I was really fascinated by the subject. And I started looking for opportunities in the specialist industry, the water treatment industry. And I didn't have to look very hard. There was a company advertising very soon after that for a sales, well, actually they called them a water treatment consultant, which was a sales and service engineer all in one. You had to sell the job and then you had to service the thing. So I had a briefcase, a test kit, a lab coat, and a bucket in the back of my car. And I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And once again, that was the grounding for very much where I am now. I then moved into other roles which were more account management on much bigger sites, refineries and power stations and things like this. And then around the year 2000, I'll skip a little bit because there was some traveling involved to Saudi Arabia. I spent 5 years in Saudi as a technical manager. But then around 2000, I found myself working for the market leading company in water treatment chemicals called Nalco, who were part of Suez in those days. And I found myself doing a pretty unique job, which required knowledge of water treatment chemistry and knowledge of IT. And a lot of people had that, but nobody had both that could actually be put together. So I found myself doing a pretty unique job, an absolutely fascinating job, and without doubt, the most exciting and interesting 5 years and challenging 5 years of my career. I then took a dive off sideways and started working for a university spin-off company in the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006, where I went from a company employing 30,000 people to a company employing 3. Not 3,000, Three. I was employee number 3. There was the chief executive, the part-time bookkeeper, and then me. And it was a complete change of direction. It was much more to do with some very specialty chemicals which had been created at one of the universities in London, and really thinking about what we were going to do with that and how we were going to market it. I then went back into water treatment with a company based in Northamptonshire. I did that for a couple of years as kind of executive without portfolio. I was kind of a director without being an official director or shareholder or anything, working in amongst the director team, pretty much doing anything they needed doing. And then an opportunity came up to come and work in the Middle East. I came to the Middle East in 2008. And I joined Culligan in early 2011, and I've been with Culligan ever since. And I have my own business units that I run. So we have chemical production, which is my responsibility. We have 2 laboratories, a chemistry lab and a micro lab, which are my responsibility technically. And I also provide technical support to the whole group. There's 350 people in the company here, a very big and wide mix of different people, but perhaps I'll talk about Culligan in a bit more detail a bit later.
Wow, amazing. A couple of things I heard about, definitely keywords that I hear young people asking more and more about. Job roles. How did you adapt to all these different types of job roles? And if you can go back to 1982 when you graduated, being proud of your degree and proud of what you had accomplished, what typical job role did you think you would have that your career journey surprised you?
That's a really interesting question, because around sort of mid 1982, around graduation time, some of the bigger companies, the oil and gas companies and the big chemical companies, were doing what they called milk rounds, where they came round to the university with a pop-up stand and a desk, and they would tell you about their organization, and you would hand them a copy of your CV and then never hear from them ever again. I just got fed up with all of that, and it was just a waste, complete and utter waste of my time. It was just a PR exercise on their part, I believed. So I said to myself, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm going to wait until I've got my degree, and then I'm going to start applying for jobs, and I'll take it from there. Not long after that, this would have been kind of April, May time, I got a telephone call from my dad, who said, there's a job advertised in the local newspaper for a chemist or a chemical engineer to work as a technical services for a chemical company based in my hometown. So I called them, arranged an interview, went along a few days later, sat down in the plant manager's office, and he said to me, just give me a moment. He said, I'm going to call the production manager who's been doing the job that we're interviewing you for the last couple of years. And we've now decided that it's too much for him. We want to create a separate role. And this fellow came along, popped his head round the door and looked at me, looked at the plant manager and said, is he applying for the job? And Peter, the plant manager, said, yes. He said, well, I suggest you give it to him then. And Peter said, and was about to leave. And Peter said, hang on a minute, you can't do that to me. You've got to give me the background story behind this. And Ken, who was the production manager, said, well, I've known this young man since he was 12 years old. We were both members of the local amateur dramatic society. I had no idea that he worked for this chemical company. We'd both been members of the local amateur dramatic society. We'd built sets, struck sets. We'd built a theatre, we'd laid parquet flooring, stood in front of a cement mixer for an entire weekend. And he said, I can give him a personal reference. If he's qualified to do the job, please just give it to him. And that was that. So he left. Peter looked at me and said, well, it looks like that's a done deal. When do you want to start?
It sounds a lot like how many jobs and job opportunities tend to be found. It's by referrals and by
yes.
your
100%.
your character recommendations from a referral, would you say things have changed a lot since then?
No, no, I don't think so at all. Except that people have changed. I think people tend to think that Facebook and Instagram and all of this kind of thing is the answer. It's not. In my personal view, it's about getting involved with something real. Doesn't matter what it is, just getting involved with something real where there are other people who can act as references, who you can learn from at a personal level, nothing to do with work, nothing to do with careers. But some of the stuff that I was doing as part of this group that I've been involved with for such a long time has stood me in great stead for years since, and then nothing to do with this first job. But it was just that chance meeting that I had with these people, with this man, sorry, with Ken, that just opened a door for me and pointed me in a direction that has ended up where I am now. I mean, the first job that I did, that very first job, pointed me in the direction where I am now. It was like a needle on a compass. You're going to go this way. Now, if I'd gone into it and decided it wasn't for me, it would have been a whole different story. But for me, life is a series of forks in the road.
Mm-hmm.
So at the fork in the road, you can either go one way or another. I decided that I was going to take this fork in the road and I was going to head down here, and I liked this fork in the road, and I've ended up meandering down that same path for the next 30 odd years. Water treatment suited my qualifications. It suited my psyche somehow, dealing with something that was important, that was fundamental, that was vital. And so that's been, how can I put it? That's been the essence of my entire career.
Excellent points that you mentioned there. And one of the things that we discuss when I have a young person and we look at, well, how do we help them to make those career choices? We are always talking about, well, you don't just want to be looking at the degree that you're interested in. You really want to look at the lifestyle that it's going to take you on and start to decide if these things sound and feel like they'll be a right fit for you. And also what you're mentioning about, not only did water treatment, was it, you know, a doable career, but it was also something that felt very real, would make an impact, and definitely something that supported your moral compass, I think is how I would describe it.
Yes, I think that's fair to say, yes.
So let's fast forward to our present time. Technical director at Culligan Middle East doesn't sound like chemical engineer. And this is something that young people don't really understand. The job title isn't going to be directly in sync with the degree that you complete. So talk to us about what a technical director is, how it is handled at Culligan Middle East, and how a degree in chemical engineering actually makes sense.
Okay, can I turn that question back to front and start with the chemical engineering bit?
Go for it.
When I was studying chemical engineering all those years ago, the professor of the department used to take us for a seminar once a week on a Wednesday afternoon, and it was all about business. It was nothing to do with engineering at all. He was a World War II explosives and munitions manufacturer. He worked for ICI Mon Division, who used to do all of that kind of stuff. And he used to have us reading the Financial Times, and he used to have us reading profit and loss accounts and financial reports and things like this. And he said, chemical engineers are the plant managers, they are the business managers, they are the technical heads of companies. And the reason for that is because a chemical engineering degree, there is a bit of it that's pure chemical engineering. And frankly, it's a little bit scary. And I learned some stuff at university that I've never used since. Chemical thermodynamics is still a complete mystery to me. However, it's a very broad brush degree. So as part of the degree, we did chemistry. we did mechanical engineering, we did engineering drawing, we did computing science, statistics, mathematics, all as in their pure form, not adapted to chemical engineering. We did modules of all of those subjects, and many of those subjects I still use today. Management accounting, which was taught to us by someone from the hotel and catering department, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Doing break-even charts and things like this, I still use that to this very day. So a chemical engineering degree gives you a very broad background with which you can head into a career, and it's unlikely you're going to use all of it, but you will use some of it. And there are degrees which you could do, say for instance, if you did a chemistry degree, you're going to be studying essentially one subject. There may be a couple of other peripheral subjects around it, but fundamentally chemistry is chemistry. And so that's gearing you up to be a chemist. A chemical engineering degree gears you up to be a number of different things. And I'm not the only chemical engineer in this organization, in Culligan. Many of the other people who work in various positions within the company, the service guys, the service managers, the laboratory team, the production manager. My production manager is a lady called Anu. She's from Kerala in India. She's a chemical engineer. She's been working with me for the last 12 years. Her background before she started working with me was as a quality manager. But now she deals with chemicals. She deals with chemical production. She deals with chemical recipes and formulas. She spends time in the laboratory making test batches and things like this to see how recipes will go together. It's a very, very wide and varied subject. And if you could say, for instance, there are 10 strands to a chemical engineering degree, unlikely that most people are going to use all 10. You might use 2 or 3 or 4. I think I've probably been fortunate to use a few more than that, but depending on which avenue of career you follow, you'll use different ones in different proportions.
Fabulous. Okay, Rodger, let's talk about Culligan.
Oh,
what is Culligan Middle East in a nutshell?
Okay, Culligan is water. It's all we do. Everything that we do is geared towards water, primarily making water suitable for a particular application. So water will start a particular process with impurities in it, with particular characteristics. And our job is to take that water, which is probably not suitable for what you're going to do with it, and turn it into water which is suitable. So that could be, let me give you a few examples. You could start with water that has to be drinkable at the end here. Now, the utility companies, the water utilities in this country produce water that's perfectly safe to drink. I often get asked that question, not quite daily, but I get it asked it very regularly. Is the water in the UAE safe to drink? My answer is, as it comes out of the factory, as it comes out of the desalination plant, yes, it is. However, between there and the tap, there are things that the water goes through that makes it unsafe, mostly tanks. Most of the villas and things like this and apartments have tanks. And once you put water in a tank, it picks up all sorts of impurities that make it unsuitable for drinking. So our job is to take that water that's been sitting in a tank and pass it through, for instance, a filtration system and make it suitable for drinking, for making coffee with, for making food and beverages, other beverages with. So another example would be at the other end of the system, wastewater. So wastewater's got all sorts of nasties in it. Our job is to make that water, and grease would be a really good one. If you're running a restaurant or a coffee shop, you're producing water that has oil and grease in it. Our job is to take that oil and grease out of the water to make it such that you can put it down the drain without it blocking things up and causing all sorts of problems. So we will make water safe for drinking. We'll make water safe for a hemodialysis unit in a hospital. Mm-hmm. We will make water safe for swimming in. say for putting into a fountain for people to stand close to without catching Legionnaires disease or anything like that. There's a whole bunch of different things that we can do. We have a number of different divisions who are focused on particular market sectors. So for instance, we have one who is focused on food service, restaurants, coffee shops, hotels. We have another one that's focused on construction industry. So the cooling circuits, the domestic water circuits, and the chilled water circuits in all sorts of buildings. Think of any large building that's in the UAE, and we've probably are working on it, or we probably have worked on it at some stage or another. Mm-hmm. You know, that's something that we do. And we manufacture water treatment chemicals for treating in the odd occasions where we can't purify the water to remove all of the impurities. We will sometimes treat the water to manage those impurities to make the water acceptable for a particular job. So we have the largest service team in the region, pretty much, certainly in the Gulf. Just on our chemical service team alone, we've got 35 men in vans who spend their time not in the office. They're out on customer sites. We've got 5 vans who are driven around by people to take water samples for our laboratories. That's all they do, is spend their time collecting samples, and there is a very particular way, a very technical way of doing that, using the right PPE, using the right procedures, and so on and so forth, so that the samples that are collected are going to be appropriate. They're not going to be adulterated in any way, and the results are not going to be interfered with. And then we've got a dozen people just working in our laboratories, some chemists in one lab and microbiologists in another lab, who between them probably process about 75,000 samples a year. It's a very busy little laboratory. So in a nutshell, that's what we do.
Wow, amazing. So much more than meets the eye.
Yeah, more than people think. Yeah, they see the badge, but they really don't. Oh, and one of the other things we do quietly in our spare time is we actually make and bottle drinking water. And now there is a move away from bottling drinking water, the small bottles. Our office, for instance, we don't have any small bottles ever anymore. We don't have them on the premises. We've all been given one of these, which is a stainless steel vacuum flask, effectively. And we have water dispensers in the building. So we've got rid of single-use plastics. We don't have the 5-gallon containers and the coolers anymore. They've all gone. We just take mains water and we filter it and chill it, and you know, we just go and fill our bottles. So that's a massive step forward for us, and it's a big change in the market for us. There's now a lot of people who want to go that way. They don't want the single-use plastics anymore.
Exactly. And before the pandemic, that was definitely something that was in the headlines all the time,
yes.
about thinking about the environment and plastic and swaying away from it. But then we were all struck by COVID-19. How did that change how business works at Culligan?
It changed everything. It changed everything. Back in March, we had our last full management meeting where everyone was in the same room. And we tried to cast our eyes as far and our minds as far forward as we could. We knew that something was coming, but we didn't quite understand what it was going to be. So we started thinking about sanitization. We started thinking about not just personal sanitization, these things, the little bottles. We started thinking about sanitizing our environment. We started thinking about keeping the place cleaner. We started thinking about security, about keeping visitors out and what that would actually mean. So, for instance, just a little thing, but it turned out to be quite a big thing for us. Traditionally, visitors would come to site to deliver invoices and collect checks. During the lockdown, for us, that all stopped. And we just sent an email to our customers saying, we're not going to accept paper invoices anymore, and we're not going to be delivering paper checks as payment anymore. Please submit your invoices electronically, and we will pay you electronically. Now that's changed, and it will never change back, ever. It's electronic. Meetings, I have a daily meeting with the rest of the management team who are calling in from all over the place. We've got a fellow calling in from India. We've got people calling in from parts of this country. We have various other people that come in from time to time, and none of us are in the same place. I sit alone in my office. My noisy Italian colleague next door, he sits in his office. Our finance director sits in another office, and we all participate individually, because if we all sit in the same room, we've all got to sit around the same microphone. We can't share documents and so on. So the idea of electronic meetings and remote meetings rather than meeting face to face, I think that's going to become a big feature of our future. Even to the extent where the people that work for me, who work in a different building, the labs people and the chemical production people, on a day-to-day basis, I don't see them face to
So
face.
let's talk about Culligan, not just in the face of how it's being managed behind the scenes, but let's look at it as a product. And how has COVID changed how water is being, you know, delivered, and how water is being treated? How has the pandemic affected your service and your product?
It has caused us some fun and games with our service teams. We've had some customers, particularly in Abu Dhabi, who've insisted on the service people having COVID-free certificates, or COVID test certificates, which has given us a whole bunch of other problems until the changes that have happened in the last couple of days with the instant COVID tests. We've had to have a COVID test done, and then the guy who's had the test done can't go anywhere for 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Then he can go to the customer site, and then before he can go again, we have to go around the cycle. So there's a whole bunch of that kind of stuff. During the lockdown, there were times where there were literally, you could count the number of people on one hand, the number of people who were actually in our facility. And normally there's 100 or so people here. It's a very busy little facility. We make things, we've got head office here, we've got finance and admin and so on, are all here. And suddenly all of these people were working from home. And that changed the dynamic of how you contact people and how you meet people. It also changed our product mix quite a bit. Some of our food service division that I mentioned earlier on, suddenly food service was closed, and our food service team had nothing to service. All of the customers, coffee shops, restaurants, hotels, all of that closed. So that made a big difference to us. We suddenly had to keep some of these people busy. On the flip side of that, the really good news was that we'd created some new products. We created a sanitizer originally for our own use, because we couldn't find anything in the market. All of the pharmacies, if we could get out to them, all the pharmacies were sold out. The supermarkets were sold out. There was no sanitizer to be had for love nor charity. So I took one of our water treatment products and adapted it to make it ready for use sanitizer, and we started using it ourselves. To date, we still give this product to our staff. We give them a 5-litre can of the product once a month, free of charge, and they can take it home and they can use it for their own use and for families if they're, if they have a family here. Then someone said, well, actually, this is pretty good stuff. Why don't we start selling it? And so we did. And we went from just like a little cottage industry making a few cans for our own use up to, well, at one stage during April, 20 tons a day.
Wow.
So what that meant was that a lot of the people who had been kind of laid off, just put to one side, who'd been part of the service team, were now suddenly moved into production. So we had guys working day and night shift. I managed to win the job of night shift manager, which was fun for a few weeks, turned my life entirely on its head. I hadn't done night shift management since I was in my kind of early 30s. Anyway, that's still with us. That bright spark of an idea, that germ of an idea, has meant that it's now our biggest selling product. And we're just about to go, I'm going to hold this away from the camera so you can't see. We're just about to go into retail with it.
Yeah.
So you'll start to see it in well-known supermarket stores. Shouldn't mention them by name, but you'll start to see them on the shelves in the very near future. All as a result of just, well, why don't we try this? And a lot of the time, it's about, the job is about, why don't we try this? Why don't we do that? And then either having or acquiring the knowledge or the skill to be able to do it. So the making of the product was actually the easy bit. Getting the certification for the product to make sure that people would have the confidence to use it, that was the tricky bit. We'd never done that before. And so there was a lot of feely finding. The other thing that was happening at the same time, because there were a lot of people coming up with similar things, is that the regulatory bodies that we were dealing with were changing the way that they were doing things and adapting the way that they were doing things on almost a daily basis. So trying to keep up with all of those changes was a challenge. They weren't, I have to stress, trying to be difficult. They were trying to protect us, the public, from unscrupulous people who were producing products that couldn't substantiate the claims that they were making or were downright dangerous. And you've seen various products being withdrawn from the market. That's directly as a result of the municipality in Dubai doing their job. And what we then had to do was kind of work around that and make sure that we understood how that was working so we could always meet the requirements.
Fabulous. Sounds a lot like, again, going back to adapting to change, not only as an individual, but also as an organization. Rodger, I could talk to you forever. Amazing career journey that you shared with us today. Brilliant organization, Culligan Water. I think what I really, I'm in awe is that as an organization, you had a team of people that could have lost opportunities. And in fact, as an organization, you found a new opportunity to fill in a need in the market and to support not just the community, but also these individuals. So that's an amazing feature to see, especially during these times when we are hearing about more and more people being made redundant and losing employment opportunities because of the pandemic. So a big thank you goes out to yourself and to Culligan for sharing these great nuggets of wisdom. What would you say are your top 3 tips for any young person thinking about going down the path of chemical engineer or even considering working in water?
There'll always be a need for water. So water is a good business to be in, no matter which aspect of it. I mean, it so happens that Culligan covers a whole bunch of them, but anything that's involved with water is always going to be good for longevity of a career. If you're going to get involved with chemical engineering, understand that the chemical engineering is a tough subject. It's not a walk in the park. As I said, there are some elements of the subject which are still, for me, after 40 years, are still a little on the scary side, but there are big payoffs, really, really big payoffs. When I was in high school, I was going to be an agricultural engineer. I'd spent most of my summer vacations working at an agricultural merchant, and so it seemed like a very good thing to do. A friend of my father's, who was a mechanical engineer who worked for Foster Wheeler, took me to one side one day and said, "You don't want to be an agricultural engineer. You'll never make any money in it and you'll never make a proper career out of it." He said, "Be a chemical engineer." So I sat and thought long and hard about it. I changed all my applications for the universities, and thankfully, one of the universities I applied for gave me an interview and gave me a place on the course, and the rest is history. Things could have been very, very different. So chemical engineering is a fascinating subject because there are so many facets to it. One of the things that we do, I ought to mention this because it's something that I feel quite strongly about. We as a department within Culligan, we run internships. So I've benefited, and I've run internships for the entire time that I've been here in the UAE. I've found them to be of benefit to the company. I found them to be massively of benefit to the people that are working for us. I absolutely insist that internships are not coffee makers. They're not photocopy operators. They get stuck in with doing something. And that's a little nugget that I would give you is, if there is an internship available, make sure that you find out from the company that's running the internship what kind of thing you're going to be doing. Are you just going to be an extra pair of hands who is literally going to be making the tea or whatever, or are you actually going to be given a project? We, in addition to anything else that we do, we always get people involved in doing project work. We always ask them to write a project report, and we always give them a certificate at the end of the internship to say that that's what they've done. We had a young lady who was working for us a couple of years ago as an intern, who came back to us the summer before. I think it was the first summer that she was at university in the UK. She'd come back and she said, "Can you give me some work, proper paid work? Can you chain me to a bench in the chemistry laboratory and give me some proper paid work? I don't want an internship. I actually want to get stuck in with some hard graft. I want to find out what this thing is going to be like." And we did. And she stuck to her degree, and she's still thoroughly enjoying it. She graduates next summer. But I would say, take the opportunity to get an internship if you can. We only have a limited number of spaces, but we will always talk to someone who's interested in coming and working as an intern, because we believe it's useful for both parties. The last thing I would say is, and I go back right to the very beginning of what I said, is think about where, and this really doesn't matter which degree you're going to do, but don't do a degree just because you think it's interesting, just because you think it's going to be fun. Think about what you might do with your degree. The world of work is becoming a lot tougher. There's a lot more competition out there, and doing a degree just because you fancy it is probably not good enough. If you're going to invest the time and the effort and the money in doing a degree of any sort, you want to make sure that there's something that's going to be at the end of the rainbow. Otherwise, don't do it. There were people when I was at university who studied the arts or history or something like this, and they had no clue what they were going to do with it at the end of the day. The government sponsored all of our degrees in those days. Those days are all over. You know, doing a degree, doing higher education has to be about what you're going to do with it later on, how you're going to build your career on it, basically.
Couldn't agree with you anymore. Thank you so much, Rodger. Fantastic tips. That was Rodger Macfarlane from Culligan Middle East, the technical director, who talked to us about his career journey from being a student at university all the way to his current role at Culligan. Great opportunities to be had at the organization. Definitely we'll be reaching out to you for opportunities for internships. We have a brilliant internship program at Desk Careers as well. So thank you so much, Rodger. And thank you everyone for watching. I look forward to seeing you all at our next Desk Careers Digital Spotlight. Have a great day, evening, or morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for watching.